Hey, it's me, Vicky Marie, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this crazy world we're living in. If you like to hear crime stories with full respect to victims and their families, please consider subscribing to my channel. So today's case is another one of those crazy ones. True life really is stranger than fiction, isn't it? So this story it will make you angry for many reasons. It's a story of how, well, it's not a story, it's real life, a tale, if you like, or it's a an education into how the ineptitude of law enforcement and the homophobia. So the ineptitude of law enforcement in two countries, homophobia in one country, the effect of homophobia in one country, not only led to the false imprisonment of a person for a heinous crime against a teenage girl, but also allowed the real murderer to walk free and to, again, for the second time, and to commit a similar crime a couple of years later. And this case has left a lot of victims in its wake, not only the actual material victims, people that were murdered by this person, but also other victims, families, his own family, etc. It's just, a person who has caused nothing but havoc in his journey in this world. God knows what's going to happen to him in the next one. Anyway, this is the story of Tony Alexander Bromwich, or King. He changed his name, so whichever one you want to call him. And this story starts in the UK, in the United Kingdom, in London, in 1967, when this person was born. And it now continues in a prison in Spain, in Herrera de la Mancha, Ciudad Real, in Spain, in Europe. So this is a story of missed opportunities, of violence, of hatred, of injustice, and homophobia, as well as misogyny. It's a story of how the court of public opinion was influencing investigations well before social media was a thing. Social media gets a bad press, but even before social media, these kind of things were happening. There are many victims in this case and only one perpetrator. 3 young girls lost their lives, 2 to murder and 1 to accident. But in my opinion, this perpetrator can also be held for this accident to some extent. Another woman, all the victims are women, either the actual murder victims or the other victims that sort of fell by the wayside. They're all women. Another woman was reviled, dragged through the courts, and even sentenced to 15 years for a murder she did not commit due to homophobia and denial. So this is the story of Rothio Wanikov Ornos. It's also the story of Maria Dolores Lolle Vázquez. And it's the story of Sonia Carabantes Guzman and little Sabrina King. And the person who's responsible for, the misery of all those people, all those women, is this man. Tony was a boy who grew up to be known as both the Holloway Strangler and also the Costa Killer. I mean, that's a dubious honour, isn't it? Having two serial killer nicknames awarded to you. So he grew up to be both the Holloway Strangler in the UK and the Costa Killer in Spain, and he left a trail of misery and injustice in his wake. Now, technically, he's not a serial killer because he only killed 2 girls that we know of. Only, so technically he doesn't meet the requisites of being called a serial killer. But, personally, I would include Sabrina in that. And who knows what other things this man did. So, yeah, that's who we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about his victims and also him. And, yeah, let's chat. So, who is this man? Well, he was born in London in the United Kingdom in 1967. He claims that he was physically abused by his older brother as a child, but I couldn't find any substantiation of this, so I don't know if this has ever been substantiated, but this is something that he claimed. And in 1986, when he was only 19 years old, he was sentenced to 10 years in a detention centre for young delinquents for the non-fatal strangulation and sex assault of 5 women that they knew about in the London district of Holloway. And before his arrest, he had been known in the local community as the Holloway Strangler. Women lived in terror at that time. He was 19 years old. So apparently, he always attacked on a Monday and a Wednesday because he was with his fiancée on the other days. He never actually penetrated his victims because he was reputedly sexually impotent. However, the rest of the damage that he did was enough. His attacks were blatant, violent, often taking place in public and in daylight. They resulted in broken jaws and noses, amongst other traumatic injuries, both physical and mental. Even worse than that pathetically lenient sentence of 10 years, he was actually released after only serving half of it from HM Prison Grendon, where he had undergone therapy to address his offending behaviour, and he was declared no longer a threat to women. 5 years he served. Just 6 months later, he was returned to prison. He was rearrested for robbing a woman at gunpoint. Another woman traumatised. He then stayed in prison till 1996. And that is when he changed his name, when he came out, to Tony Anthony King. So in my opinion, it's significant that he chose the name King. You know, he thought he was a king, didn't he? He thought he was, he had this exaggerated idea of his importance. Imagine changing your name to King, just because you thought you were so fantastic. Anyway, Tony, in your dreams, you weren't much of a king. Anyway, that same year that he was released, he married Cecilia Matilde Pantoja, who was Chilean origin, but living in London at the time. And he married her when she was 2 months pregnant with their daughter, Sabrina. I've got a picture here of their wedding. The thing is, this man, so he was engaged when he went to prison the first time. This man did not, he could find women. He wasn't, what's the word? He wasn't sort of, he is one of these ones that walk amongst us, leading normal lives. Quite a good looking guy. They get married, don't they, for this sort of, they like a veneer of respectability. Cecilia obviously was impressed with him at the time when she met him. They got into a relationship pretty quickly. He'd met her in Goodfellas nightclub in Streatham, South London, when he asked her for a cigarette. As soon as I heard that, I just thought, well, straight away he's been a parasite. Before he's even done anything else, he's asking her for a cigarette. It just, to me, it's just like a marker, isn't it? The very first contact that you have with someone, they're sponging off you. It's anyway. So at the time, he told Cecilia that this is Cecilia now, just by the way. He told Cecilia, who, to be honest, from all the interviews I've seen with Cecilia, she seems to be one of those women that believes everything her husband tells her without looking into it. Anyway, he told her that he had a criminal record, but he said it was for armed robbery. Oh, well, that's okay then, hey? But he claimed he'd been forced into it because of poverty. I mean, he probably gave her a right sob story about his... about his childhood, etc. He said he'd been abused by his brother, and who knows what he told Cecilia, the full story of what he told her. But it seems like Cecilia just believed him. The very next year, in August 1997, he was up to his old tricks. Well, he may well have done other things in that time, but this time it was caught on CCTV. And he threatened a Hungarian woman with a knife, and he attempted to rape her in Leatherhead railway station. Again, a blatant attack, in front of people, really, in a busy railway station. And but this time it was captured on CCTV. And on the 2nd of September 1997, this CCTV was shown on Crime Watch, which is a program in the UK, a bit like America's Most Wanted, where once a month they go over the different crimes, make police appeals, etc., and show CCTV. And his CCTV was shown on that program. And it's a very, very clear picture of him that I'm going to show you. So this is what came up on Crime Watch. And as a result, Scotland Yard, the police force, London Police, they received many, many tips to his identity. Some of his victims were watching that Crime Watch programme and immediately recognised him, from before, his victims from before he went to prison, because it's a very clear photo, as you can see. So they received numerous calls from viewers who identified the attacker as Tony Bromwich, as he was called at the time, and an order of arrest was issued. But by then, Tony King and Cecilia, his wife, had gone off to Spain, to Malaga, fled to Spain with their daughter Sabrina. And they'd taken refuge in Malaga, where there's a large British expat community. Now, it's terrifying, this, to me, because I live in Spain, not in Malaga, but, in all parts of Spain, there are large British expat community. Not only British, but other European nationalities as well. And they don't call it Costa del Crime for nothing, because, you really don't. People reinvent themselves. They come to live in Spain. They go into these isolated communities and, become a different person. So he moved into that community with his wife and his daughter. And that community did not know his history. He's changed his name. Many people there wouldn't have even seen that Crime Watch program, or wouldn't have linked it with him. He's just arrived there and merged in with the community. It's quite scary, actually, because you really don't know people's histories, do you? And Cecilia said that she was quite happy to go to Spain because she's originally from Chile and she speaks fluent Spanish. And they'd been talking about it, but he'd been resisting going for quite a long time. Suddenly it was right, come on, we're going. And within a month, they were gone. And this is where you'll get really angry, because 6 months later, the British police located him in Mijas, where he was working as a real estate agent. And they requested him to return voluntarily to the UK. I mean, can you imagine that? Let's have a look at this Mijas place. Now, these three, you've got Mijas here, and you've got Alaran del Grande. Sorry, I can't read the name to give the proper pronunciation. And Cohen here. Now, they're all very relevant to this story, but this moment is in Mijas. That's where he was located. So he's working as a real estate agent. He's taking people round to look at houses, maybe sometimes alone with his clients. Maybe a woman showing her a house. It's terrifying, isn't it? And nobody knowing what his history is. I mean, and his wife, she knew what he'd told her, that he'd been in prison for armed robbery. That's bad enough, isn't it? But actually, the reality, of course, was even more scary. So, funnily enough, Tony refused voluntarily to return to the UK. I mean, I just can't believe that. He was asked to return voluntarily to the UK after all the things that he'd done. He's been to prison already for 10 years for violent offences. He's tried to RAPE another woman, another poor woman, another victim. He's been caught on CCTV. Why was he not made to come back? I just do not understand it. Anyway, so he refused, and they apparently informed Spain's Ministry of the Interior of his presence in Malaga. But apparently, this notice was labelled low risk. So this is the second mistake, isn't it? This is, the British police weren't too good, really, dealing with Tony. And then we've got, and the British system of justice system. And now we've got Spain. Both these administrations, I think, play a role of guilt in what happened next, because this man was known to be in Mijas. His past history was known, and the Spanish government labelled him low risk. And so it was not, and apparently it was not accompanied by a petition of arrest and extradition. So who was at fault there? Was it the British government? Was it the Spanish government? Was it a combination of the two? And by coincidence, at this real estate agency where he was working, the mother of his first Spanish victim worked there, though it's not thought that they ever interacted. That's just an interesting aside, isn't it? But this is where the Spanish nightmare began. So this guy has already caused havoc in London. And now he's gone all the way to Spain, and he's just about to cause havoc again, if he hadn't already done some things that maybe hadn't been reported. So, this girl, Rocío Waninkoff Ornos, a 19-year-old Dutch-Spanish girl. Rocío was born in 1979 to Willem Waninkoff, who was a Dutch citizen, and his Spanish wife, Alicia, who was a native of Jaén. Let's have a look at a photo of Alicia. This is her mother, Alicia. So Rocío had a sister and a brother. She was beautiful, she was young, she loved football, and she was sociable. She had her whole life in front of her. She was having a great time. She had a boyfriend, Tony Jurado. Let's have a look at Tony. So this is Rocío, Tony at the time. He was obviously a similar age to her. And this is Tony quite recently. He's recently spoke out about this case. Tony was, thought to be responsible for quite a long time. He was investigated, 11 months. He was investigated for this crime as well. So, back to Rocío. Rocío lived in the Mijas residential area, La Cortiquera, with her mother and siblings. And by the time of her death, her parents had separated. And in fact, her mum had been in a long-term lesbian relationship with Maria Dolores, her nickname was Lolly Vázquez, and she had helped to raise Rocío. So, they'd had a long-term relationship, and Lolly had helped to raise Rocío, been like a second mother to her for quite a long time. But by the time of Rocío's death, they had separated as well. So not only Rocío's parents had separated, and then Alicia got into the relationship with Lolly, and then they separated. So at the time of Rocío's death, Alethea was actually with a new man. And Alethea now to this day denies that she was ever a lesbian. She says that she was manipulated into it by Lolly, whatever. That's what Alethea says. Anyway, so although they had ended their relationship in 1988, they continued to live together for a while, and they generally remained on good terms apparently until 1994. That's when Lolly and Alethea fell out in 1994, and then it seemed to be actually quite acrimonious between them. So it's not clear exactly why, but it's thought to be financial disputes, property disputes, the ownership of the house, other properties. Anyway, Alethea continued to reside in Mijas with her children, and she then later began a relationship with a Spanish man, Juan Cerrillo, and this relationship was ongoing at the time that Rocío disappeared, never to be seen again. Rocío said goodbye to her mother and sister at around 5:30 in the evening on the 9th of October 1999. She walked 500 metres to the home of her boyfriend, Tony, and she stayed with him, apparently, until 9:30. So this is her boyfriend, Tony Jurado. And according to her boyfriend, at 9:30 in the evening, she left the house with the intent to take a shower, change her clothes, to go home, take a shower, change her clothes, and then she was going to meet up with him and other friends at a fair in Fuengirola that same evening. This apparently was the first and only time that she'd ever made that walk alone. Usually she'd either be driven home or picked up at his home by her mother or her sister. And a foreign resident who has long since passed away, in fact passed away before the trial, was the last person to see Rocío walking from La Cala to Mijas. Very short distance, 500 metres. And she would have felt safe. I mean, in these sort of places, you do feel safe. You do feel safe. It was summer. It may well have still been light because, oh no, it wasn't. It was October. So it wouldn't have still been light. It would have been dark. But yeah, off she set, and she was never seen alive again, except by her killer. So when she didn't come home, Rocío's mother, Alethea, contacted her boyfriend and friends the next day, and they told her that she had never come to the fair. She had never appeared at the fair. So obviously Alethea was concerned, and her and her boyfriend Juan, or partner Juan, went, for a walk to see if they could wondered what had happened to her. Had she had an accident? Was she there somewhere on the way to her boyfriend's house? I don't think she really thought. I don't think she would have thought at first that anything untoward would have happened. Not in that area. It is rare for these things to happen in Spain. Anyway, during the walk, they found a pair of running shoes that they realised were Rocío's. They found a napkin and several blood stains in a vacant part of the road that would have been used by her to get to her boyfriend's house. I think it must have been chilling to find those shoes there. Anyway, so they alerted the Guardia Civil, the Spanish police. They cordoned off the area. They started to search for her. with the help of her family and over 1,000 neighbours. So the whole community came out to look for Rothio. And although there was, they didn't find a body initially, it was apparent that she had been murdered because of the amount of blood. Because there was a blood trail which began at 1.10 meters from the sidewalk or from the pavement and continued to a blood pool which was large enough to have caused her death by loss of blood. There was so much blood there, it was virtually impossible that she could still be alive. And next to the blood pool were drag marks, and crossing over them and in the blood there were tyre tracks. And because the dragging marks apparently were over very high sloping ground, the police felt that it would have made it difficult for one person to drag a body alone up that slope. Now, it's never been, since then, it's never been proven that anybody else was involved in this crime. But I just wanted to say that at the time, that's what the police were thinking. So they felt that it was felt at the time that the body had been dragged by at least two people and then left in a less exposed area of the vacant lot before then later a vehicle was brought to transport the body to another location. But I don't know that was ever proven. I mean, I don't know. Rothio was probably quite slight. Tony King, he was a muscular man. So I don't know that it would have been difficult for him to drag that body. But anyway, a couple of days later, at the time, it was thought there would have been more than one person involved. And then a couple of days later, a taxi driver came forward to say that round about 10 o'clock on the night that Rothio disappeared, he had dodged an off-road vehicle driving on the wrong side of the road at the exact point on the road where the running shoes were found. And when that vehicle passed him, he says he heard a high-pitched shriek or a scream that scared him. So was that the moment that Rothio, was she literally lifted out of her shoes, attacked, just lifted up and taken away? I mean, who knows? We don't know even to this day the exact circumstances. Anyway, on the 16th of October, DNA testing confirmed that the blood belonged to poor Rothio. And then finally, after many searches, on the 2nd of November, a naked body was found between Marbella and San Pedro de Alcántara. This body was disfigured, stabbed 9 times, partially mummified and skeletal, and an autopsy confirmed that it was in fact Rothio. Now, Rothio, she had many wounds, and they were all thought to be caused by the same weapon, a thin, single-edged razor. SEX assault could not be proven either way due to the advanced decomposition of the body. Yeah, so it was thought to have been left on the ground for several hours before the killer returned and put it in their car. So, which would make the taxi driver's story wrong, wouldn't it? But anyway, it was later deposited, the police said, not thrown in the second location. It was partially covered by bushes and fallen leaves when it was found. So now it was definitely a murder case. It was no longer a missing persons case. It was murder. And after a lot of speculation from both the public, the police, and Alithia, Rothio's mother, who had a lot to do with the aspersions, cast finally on Lolly, her ex-partner, who had been like another mother to Rothio. And despite there being no evidence whatsoever that it was anything to do with Lolly, suspicion cast on her, and she was hung, drawn and quartered in the court of public opinion. No evidence whatsoever. People said, oh, she was gay, she was aggressive, she was jealous of Rossio. And these flames were fanned by Alicia, Rothio's mother herself. She said that Lolly thought, this is Alicia said, that Lolly blamed Rothio for their breakup, and that Lolly thought that if she got rid of Rothio, her and Lolly could get back together. And she actually said that, came out and said that. So literally the whole of Spain was talking about this, and virtually the whole of Spain was anti Lolly, for her sexuality. I think that was what was behind it. They said she was aggressive, she was abrupt, she was this, she was that. And there was no evidence to link her with Rothio's death. And, from what I can see, from the interviews I've seen, she always behaved with dignity and respect. Lolly, I mean. She begged the people of Spain to see beyond their prejudices and look elsewhere for the culprit. She literally begged the people of Spain to not, look on her in that way. And she said she loved Rossio. She had helped raise her, and she thought of her as her daughter. She could never hurt her. But the people of Spain and the Guardia Civil did not listen. And she also pleaded that while she was having the finger pointed at her, and she was very true in what she was saying, the real culprit was walking free, and he was. And no one listened. The only other person that was ever considered as a suspect was the boyfriend, Tony Jurado. He spent 11 months as a possible suspect as well. And incredibly, Lolly was actually eventually found guilty of Rothio's murder, despite a complete lack of evidence, and she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Sentenced to 15 years in prison for something that she did not do. There was no evidence that she did it. Anyway, that conviction was overturned and a new trial was convened. But she'd already spent some time in prison. So she's waiting for a new trial. And that's when everything changed. She was still guilty in the eyes of the public and Alicia's eyes. And Alicia, Rothio's mum, was still fanning the flames. She was still saying jealousy was the reason. Yeah, if Lolly thought that if Rothio was dead, her and Lolly would be able to get back together with Alicia. Don't forget, Alicia insists that she's not gay, actually. She insists that Lolly manipulated her into that relationship, which was a long relationship, by the way. Wasn't just like 5-minute thing. She lived with her. They lived together as a couple. And Lolly helped to bring up Alicia and her siblings. And this is, not Alicia, Rothio and her siblings. And this is how Alicia talked about Lolly. She manipulated her into a relationship. Whatever. Anyway, so in the meantime, what was happening with Tony King and his wife Cecilia and their daughter Sabrina? Well, in the year 2000, Cecilia left Tony King, abandoned him, took her daughter with her. Now she says that she left because of economic problems, Also, her own fear that he might have been involved in Rossio's murder. So she apparently suspected him. Cecilia suspected Tony of Cecilia's murder. Sorry, not Cecilia's murder, Rothio's murder. But she didn't go to the police at the time. I really cannot understand this, because she had a daughter herself. And if she really did suspect him at the time, why did she suspect him for a start? Why? You wouldn't just suspect your partner unless you had a reason, would you? So what she says is that he came home that night of Rothio's murder and he spent a long time in the bathroom cleaning up. And she said that she was surprised because when he came out, the bathroom was spotless. And he wasn't a person who normally left the bathroom spotless. He normally left it in a mess. So that is why she was suspicious then that night, because obviously she would have heard about Rothio's disappearance and then later about when the body was found. So she knew, because it was a massive story. Everybody knew about this story in that area. The expat community would have been talking about it. She spoke Spanish, so she probably would have seen it on the Spanish news as well. So despite suspecting him, she never went to the police at that time. Anyway, so they'd separated. And in 2001, Tony King began to work in a local English pub called the Chicken Shack, and he became friends with a co-worker named Simon Bowers. Simon later moved to Alaurin El Grande and opened his own bar called the Bowers Arms, where he employed Tony King as a cook, waiter and a bouncer. So let's just have a look at this map again, see how close it is. So now we've gone from Micas, where Rothio went missing. Now we're in this place, Alaurin El Grande. And then take note of this place, Cohen. So they're all sort of areas very close by each other. He also then, Tony, met a local school cleaner, janitor, Mariluth Gallego, and he moved in with her and her 3 children. Oh my God. Imagine finding out that you'd had him in your home. So here he is again in another relationship, children involved. This man, who is a convicted strangler, basically. And the home that they lived in there, it was next to a school. Because, of course, she was a cleaner at the school. And next to a Guardia Civil station. Next to a police station. I mean, for fuck's sake. Just, this man was right there. Anyway, apparently he only interacted actually with the police once when he was questioned about shooting rabbits or poaching rabbits. So I think it's important to mention here about this self-isolation of British communities in Spain. Apparently in 2003, it was estimated that the whole Malaga province was home to 180,000 permanent British residents and 4 or 5 times more transient ones. Also, there were 7 English language newspapers, 8 English language radio stations, and numerous real estate firms and pubs, etc., that only catered to British customers. So, there are so many parts of Spain like this. They're like big sort of almost British ghettos. People, and it winds me up a bit because there are people who complain about immigrants in their own country, not only British. Come to Spain, go, I've come to Spain because I'm sick of the immigrants in Britain, or I'm sick of this. They come to Spain and live. Don't integrate, don't try and learn Spanish. Only listen to, they've got all these, everything's British. It's just Britain under the sun, and they do everything that they complain that the immigrants do in their country. That's what they're running away from. And they come to Spain and do exactly the same thing. Anyway, that's like a bugbear of mine. But anyway, going back to this very sad story, and that's how he blended into that community. He blended into that community, was working in the bars. He was, having social contact with people after everything that he'd done. So now we're going to go to Cohen, that other place on the map. Here, not far from where Tony King was working, living, leading, his best life. And on this time, what happened was another girl disappeared. Sonia Carabantes, another beautiful Spanish teenager, 17 years old. And on the 14th of August 2003, she was reported missing in Coyen. And it was an almost identical scenario to what had happened to Rocío. It was her mother, Encarna Guzman, who found her daughter's sandals, purse, and phone in the street next to a large blood stain. So again, the shoes, I just think, did he lift these girls just out, literally lift them up out of their shoes, after attacking them? Anyway, Sonia, the search to her disappearance became, obviously a subject of media interest all over Spain. And the search to find Sonia was extensive, more than 700 volunteers, helicopter caving team. So again, all, quite similar to the case of Rocío. So the similarities between these two cases, they were unmistakable. Both young, attractive, popular girls who went missing near their homes after attending or planning to attend a town fair. And on the 19th of August, during this search, Sonia's body was found near a street and she was naked and covered with stones. And the autopsy revealed that she died by asphyxiation. And in their investigation of Sonia's case, the police discovered DNA, which, and this was matched with the DNA that had been found at the scene of Rocío's murder. So finally, when she heard this news, Cecilia, the ex-wife of Tony King and mother to his daughter Sabrina, she finally went to the police with her suspicions. She had since remarried, and her new husband, David, encouraged her to go, as he had always had doubts about Tony, he said. So this is Cecilia with her new husband. So apparently he'd seen cuts on Tony's wrist and that his arm was bandaged, and a light knocked out on his car when he came to pick up Sabrina once. And when the police questioned Tony, it was soon discovered that it was, in fact, his DNA that matched. And Tony initially confessed, but he later recanted his confession and protested his innocence. And he cast aspersions yet again on poor Lolly, who, I just really feel for Lolly, what she went through during this, the time when she was suspected of this crime. So yeah, he confessed initially, but later recanted. But of course, then it was on the news, even in the UK. And his victims there saw him and came forward. And that's when the dots were finally joined between the Holloway Strangler and the Costa killer. But remember, the Spanish police had been warned about Tony before. How was this all allowed to happen? How is it all was it allowed to happen? I think both Rocío and Sonia's murders could have been prevented. Anyway, so Lolly Vasquez's upcoming trial was suspended and then the case was closed and she was finally set free completely. But remember, she had spent 17 months in prison. Lolly had spent 17 months in prison. And to this day, she has still received no compensation or nor even apologies, not from the authorities and certainly not from Rothio's mother, Alithia, who still accuses her of being involved, along with denying that she's a lesbian, that in fact that Lolly manipulated her into the whole relationship. So yeah, whatever, Alithia. So what happened to Tony? So in 2005, Tony Alexander King was sentenced to 36 years in prison for the death of Sonia Carabantes and to an additional 7 years for an unrelated sex attack he'd committed in Benalmadena. And then in 2006, he was found guilty of Rothio's murder and he was sentenced to another 19 years for that crime. And it is thought that he has probably committed more crimes. And personally, I agree with that completely. You know, this man is a monster. He can fit, but he's a monster that can fit into society. He can work, he can have friends, he can have relationships, he can have children. Relatively good looking. He's sort of almost bland looking, isn't he? Like, you know, you wouldn't sort of, he doesn't stand out as some sort of monster. And reportedly he said he knew what he did was wrong. He just couldn't stop doing it. He's not criminally insane. He's just nasty and cruel. Now, it is thought that he was a good father to Sabrina, his daughter. But you know what? Despite the other, you know, the way he treated other young girls, how could he do things to other young girls when he had a daughter himself, which apparently he was a good father to? Having said that, Sabrina did not have a chance at life either, because in September 2007, at only 10 years old, little Sabrina was pulled from a private swimming pool, unresponsive, while her mother Cecilia and stepdad were in the house, and she died later in hospital. This was the only time that Tony King was allowed to leave the Granada prison. Not Granada, the prison he is being held under top security, to attend Sabrina's funeral. My heart just breaks for Sabrina. Rest in the arms of angels, Sabrina. The short life you had was tainted by your father, and you didn't get a chance to find your own happiness in life. So he remains in prison, and he'll be in there until August 2033, when he will be 68 years old, if he makes it. So he started off in Alhorán de la Torre, Malaga, which was the prison nearest to the courts investigating the murders. In July 2004, he was transferred to Albalote in Granada, and 4 years later, he was sent to Herrera de la Mancha in the Ciudad Real. And that is where he is to this day. And he's been kept under the controversial Article 93 of the prison regulations, which has been in place since 1996. This is basically permanent solitary confinement. There's a lot of public controversy over this. There's been a congressional proposal to repeal this sort of act that allows permanent reviewable. So it gets reviewed every now and again, but he really, because of his status, he's been in, you know, just permanent solitary confinement ever since he was imprisoned. So this is where inmates convicted of terror, mafia affiliation, or of committing especially violent crimes against sexual freedom and or prisoners considered extremely dangerous are kept in solitary confinement 21 hours a day, every day. And he has lived under those conditions ever since he was in that prison. Oh, do we feel sorry for him? Not really. Inmates spend 21 hours a day inside an individual 8 square metre, Monday through Sunday, January to December, year after year. They have breakfast, lunch and dinner behind bars. Every day they are frisked and their possessions searched. They're almost always alone and under surveillance. They had very limited contact with other inmates or prison workers. They get at least 3 hours a day in the courtyard, which may occasionally be extended a further 3 hours for programmed activities. But in the case of Tony King, it's applied its most restrictive. He only gets the 3 hours, but occasionally refuses to go outdoors, apparently, particularly on cold or rainy days, and he spends that time instead in a room where he works on puzzles. He's not allowed to go to the canteen or buy food or personal hygiene products. Instead, he makes a list and another inmate takes care of it. But he's a model prisoner, apparently. No problems with discipline, no problem. His attitude towards the prison guards is good. So he's just going along with it all. So, do we feel sorry for him? Not really, do we? He's been a couple of the other inmates that have been in there, he joins this illustrious group of real pieces of shit that end up with this very restrictive regime. So this is a story of 3 unnecessary deaths. King should have been caught, in my opinion, as soon as he came to Spain when the British authorities warned the Spanish. Why did they not follow up on that? Why was he allowed to just carry on and go on and murder these 2 girls? Why didn't the British government keep it up? I mean, it's only a short flight away. It's not out of Mongolia. It's Spain, for God's sake. And this was before Brexit. So those actions, if they would have acted, the Spanish authorities would have acted on it, or the British authorities would have been more insistent. That would have saved both Rothio and Sonia, and prevented an innocent woman, Lolly, from being hung out to dry by public opinion, even serving time in prison for something she did not know. Also, should Cecilia have denounced her husband as soon as she suspected him of Rothio's murder? I mean, to me, it just seems like a no-brainer. If she thought not only, sorry, Cecilia, I know she was a victim as well in a way, but at the end of the day, if she suspected him and she let him have custody of her daughter, and, poor Sabrina was sort of, just, I don't know. I don't want to judge Cecilia because she's not a killer, but I do feel that she could have. This is Cecilia now. I do feel like she should have, especially having a daughter herself. Maybe she should have. She should have gone to the police. But anyway, so. And could little Sabrina have been saved, from drowning in the pool while her mother and stepfather were in the house? Only they know that. But anyway, let me know what you think in your comments. Fly free, in the arms of angels, Rothio, Sonia and Sabrina. And Lolly, I hope you managed to rebuild your life. And Tony King, to you I just say, what you're suffering now in this life will only be worse in the next. Okay, thank you for watching. I'll see you really soon in the next video. And until then, may your God go with you. Bye.